My name is Caroline Ashford. I am 43 years old. And on the 14th of March, at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon, I sat in a lawyer's conference room in Scottsdale, Arizona, and watched my sister Diane smirk as our mother's estate attorney read the last line of a will that left me exactly $1. $1. Not a percentage, not a conditional clause, not a portion set aside in a separate account pending review. One single, deliberate, premeditated dollar. The kind of sum that is not an oversight. It is a message. Diane didn't bother hiding her reaction. She was sitting directly across the mahogany conference table from me in a blush pink blazer she had bought specifically for the occasion, and when Gerald Okafor, the estate attorney, finished reading the final line of the document, she pressed her lips together and exhaled through her nose in a controlled way that told me she had been rehearsing this moment. Her shoulders lifted slightly. She looked at the table, then at me, and she said, "Well, I guess Mom knew what she was doing." I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I sat with my hands folded on top of the conference table, fingers interlaced, palms flat, the way I had been trained to sit in rooms where everything depended on composure. And while Diane performed her careful, practiced satisfaction, I thought about a specific Thursday morning 4 months earlier. I thought about an office on the 17th floor of a building in downtown Phoenix. I thought about a woman named Patricia Helm and a trust officer named Richard Solano, and a folder of documents that nobody in that conference room knew existed. What they didn't know was that the $1 was the least interesting thing in that room. This is that story. Before I go any further, I want to stop and ask you something. What part of the world are you watching or listening from right now? And what time is it where you are? I genuinely want to know. Drop your city, your country, and your local time in the comments below. Every time I see where these stories travel, it reminds me that what we carry quietly is understood by far more people than we ever imagine. And if this is the kind of story that reaches somewhere real inside you, if you have ever been the overlooked one, the capable one, the daughter they called self-sufficient as a way of saying they did not need to think about you, please like this video and subscribe to Revenge Chronicles. We publish a new story every single day, and every one of them is made for women who understand what it means to build something in silence. Now let me take you all the way back to Phoenix, Arizona, and a family that ran on appearances, the way some families run on love. My parents, Robert and Vivian Ashford, built their life in the Arcadia neighborhood of Phoenix, which is one of those established mid-century corridors where the houses sit behind mature citrus trees and the lawns are maintained within an inch of their lives, and everyone knows roughly what everyone else earns, without anyone ever actually saying a number out loud. The house was a single-story ranch with 4 bedrooms, a swimming pool in the back that caught the afternoon light like something from a design magazine, and bougainvillea growing up the east wall in shades of magenta and coral that my mother tended as carefully as she tended her own reputation. My father, Robert Ashford, ran a wholesale auto parts distribution company called Ashford Supply, which his own father Harold had started in 1958, and which Robert had grown from a modest regional operation into something considerably more substantial over the course of 30 years of quiet, methodical work. They were not wealthy in the way that old East Coast families are wealthy. They were comfortable in the specifically Phoenix way, which means they had a nice house and 2 decent cars, and a membership at a tennis club, and no visible anxieties about money. My mother, Vivienne, was a woman who hosted charitable luncheons and sat on 3 nonprofit boards, and had never once in my living memory appeared in public with her hair undone or her expression unguarded. She was gracious at a distance and precise about everything. She sent handwritten thank you notes within 24 hours of receiving any gift, no matter how small, and kept a color-coded calendar on the kitchen wall where birthdays and anniversaries were listed in her neat, even cursive. In her way, she was remarkable. In the way that mattered most, for a very long time she looked right through me. There were 2 daughters in the Ashford house. Diane came first, born 47 years ago, the elder by 4 years. And then came me, Caroline, the younger one, the quieter one, the one who from an early age preferred the company of numbers and books to the company of rooms full of people performing. I took after my father rather than my mother, which in Vivian Ashford's world was a kind of quiet original sin. My father was reserved and methodical and brilliant in the specific way that people who understand systems and structures and the long consequences of patient decisions are brilliant. He was not gregarious. He did not charm rooms. He built things. He was also, I believe, one of the most perceptive and quietly generous people I will ever know in my life, though I am only capable of saying that with full certainty now, with the particular clarity that comes after loss, which is when we finally stop editing what we see. Diane was our mother's daughter in every visible and audible way. Blonde where I was dark, social where I was studious. She moved through rooms the way Vivienne wanted to move through rooms, as if the room had been assembled specifically for her arrival and was grateful she had come. She laughed easily and loudly and said the right things to the right people at the right moments and understood intuitively that most of social life is a performance and that the people who succeed at performance are the ones who never let the audience sense the effort behind it. She married Marcus Ellison at 26, a commercial real estate developer with a firm jaw and a country club membership, and a reliable talent for generating the impression of more success than the numbers strictly supported. They settled into a house in Paradise Valley and produced 2 children named Griffin and Ellie, who were brought to family functions in coordinated outfits that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. They assembled an image that my mother found deeply personally satisfying, in the way that people find satisfying the things that confirm what they have always already believed about the world. I took a different path. I went to the University of Arizona on a partial academic scholarship, studied finance and economics with a focus I would describe as slightly feverish, and graduated with honors in May of 2003. I took a position at a regional investment advisory firm in Tempe called Meridian Capital Advisors, which was not a glamorous place but was a rigorous one, where I learned the actual mechanics of managing money from the ground up. I worked 12-hour days for 7 years. I earned my certified financial planner designation on the first attempt. I learned how to read a balance sheet at a level most people with the title cannot actually reach. I learned how to sit across from a person who is genuinely terrified about their financial future and give them something real to hold on to. And then in 2010, at the age of 28, I left to start my own firm. No outside investors. No safety net beyond the savings I had accumulated over 7 disciplined years. No partner. Just a business plan I had been writing and revising in notebooks for 2 full years, and the belief that if I worked hard enough and carefully enough at something real, it would become real. The firm was called Ashford Financial Partners. I kept the family name deliberately. I thought it might open a door or two. It opened very few doors at home. My mother never once asked about the firm in any serious way over the years that followed. Not about clients, not about revenue trajectory, not about what I was building or how the model was growing. When relatives at family gatherings asked what I did, she would say, "Caroline does something with investments," or "Caroline works with money," in the tone of someone describing a hobby rather than a profession, and then redirect the conversation to Diane's children or Marcus's most recent development project. When I landed my first institutional client, a regional hospital system in Tucson, with $23 million in assets under management, which was a real and significant achievement for a solo-founded firm in its 2nd year of operation, I mentioned it at a Sunday family dinner. My mother nodded in the way she nodded at things she had already decided were not worth full attention and said, "That is wonderful, dear," and then asked Diane whether she and Marcus had decided on granite or quartz countertops for the kitchen renovation they had been planning. I watched the conversation turn. I kept eating. There is a particular kind of dismissal that does not announce itself with any drama. It does not come with raised voices or direct confrontations. It comes in the form of questions not asked, and achievements not mentioned, and seats not saved, and attention paid elsewhere. It comes when your sister gets a standing ovation at the dinner table for putting a deposit on a vacation house in Sedona, while your 7-figure client list sits between the salad and the entree, as though it were not there. It comes in the slow accumulation of small erasures over years and years until you understand, without anyone having said it clearly, that in this family you are loved the way furniture is loved. Appreciated for being solid and functional and always in the right place when needed. But no one stops to admire furniture. No one thinks about what it actually took to build it. Some of you watching right now understand exactly what I am describing. without any further explanation. You have been in that room. You have eaten at that table. Let me give you 3 specific moments, because I want you to understand that what happened in that conference room in March was not a surprise to me. It was a conclusion. The final sentence of a very long paragraph that had been building since I was a child. The first moment. 2014. I had just closed a referral arrangement that generated a fee of $87,000 from a single transaction. It was the kind of result that told me clearly the model was working and the business was real. I used a portion of that money to pay off the last of my student loan debt, which I had been carrying and carefully managing since 2003. I used another portion as a down payment on a commercial unit on Camelback Road, which I converted into dedicated office space for Ashford Financial Partners. I was 32 years old, and I owned property outright with no debt attached to it. When I mentioned the property purchase at my mother's birthday dinner that October, Diane tilted her head slightly and said, "Oh, you bought an office building?" in a tone that suggested I had said I'd bought a particularly ugly piece of furniture for a house no one visited. My mother asked whether anyone at the table had been to the new restaurant in Scottsdale that Marcus had a stake in. The second moment, 2017. I was named to the Phoenix Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list. There was a formal ceremony, a printed program with a full-page profile and a professional photograph, and a paragraph about the firm's growth, and a quoted endorsement from one of my institutional clients. I brought 2 printed copies of the program to my parents' house the following Sunday. My father took his copy and read it slowly and carefully, all the way through, the way he read anything he considered important. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me and squeezed my shoulder once, firmly, and said quietly, "I always knew you were going to build something real, Caroline." He did not say it loudly or for any audience. He said it to me specifically, and he meant it completely, and I felt it land exactly where it was intended. My mother picked up the second copy, looked at the photograph on the first page, and said, "Your hair looks nice here. You should wear it down more often." She set the program on the counter by the fruit bowl. 2 days later, when I came back to the house to feed their cat while they were at a tennis event, I found the program in the recycling bin, next to a stack of junk mail and an empty cardboard box. The third moment, 2020. My father, Robert Ashford, passed away in the spring after a short illness. He was 71 years old. It was fast and it was cruel, in the specific way that swift illness is cruel, and it left a particular kind of hole in the landscape of my life that I am still slowly learning to navigate. My mother, understandably overwhelmed and grieving, asked me to manage the estate administration. The work involved 2 probate attorneys, required filings in Maricopa County Superior Court, and the careful untangling of 30 years of business and personal financial structures spread across 4 different financial institutions. It took 3 sustained months of effort, conducted simultaneously with running the firm and managing my own grief. I did it without compensation, without complaint, because my mother was 70 years old and devastated, and I understood the landscape, and because that is what capable daughters do in families like ours. When the estate was fully settled, and every account was resolved, and every document was filed, my mother took Diane on a restorative trip to Sedona for a long weekend to recover from the emotional weight of the preceding months. She sent me a fruit basket. It arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to my office by a driver. The ribbon was lavender. The card said, "Thank you for everything, dear." I want to be clear that I am not recounting these moments to build a legal case or a character indictment against my mother. She was not a cruel person. I do not believe she intended any of it as cruelty. I believe she understood me so poorly and had categorized me so thoroughly and so early as the self-sufficient one, the capable one, the daughter who did not need the same tending that Diane required, that it genuinely did not occur to her that I might also want to be seen. The fruit basket was not a punishment. It was the truest expression of how she saw me, as someone who already had everything she needed and for whom a gesture would therefore be sufficient. She was right about some of that. I did have what I needed, but she had no idea what I had built, or how quietly I had built it, or what was about to walk into a room on her behalf. That is, I have come to think, the saddest version of this entire story. Not malice. Just a failure to look. Now I need to tell you about something that happened 9 years before the will reading. Something that did not begin 4 months before that conference room, not 1 year before, but 9 years before, on a Friday afternoon in September of 2015. This is the part where everything changes. And I want to be careful here, because I did not plan what happened in that conference room. I only prepared for it, over years, quietly, in the way I do everything. Planning and preparation are different things, and the difference between them matters. My father called me to his office one afternoon in September. Not for a family dinner, not on a Sunday. A specific call on a Tuesday, asking me to come in on Friday. The call was brief and uncharacteristic of him. He said, "I need you to come by the office Friday afternoon. There is something I want to show you." He did not explain further. My father was not a man who over-explained anything. He trusted that the people he chose to speak to would simply show up when asked to. I showed up on Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. His office was at the Ashford Supply headquarters on the east side of Phoenix, a building that smelled like industrial carpet and old coffee, and the dry warmth of desert air running through an aging system. He was sitting behind his desk, which was the same desk his father Harold had used, a massive piece of solid mahogany that had survived 2 office renovations through sheer virtue of being too heavy to move without significant effort. He set a manila folder on the desk between us and folded his hands on top of it and looked at me for a moment, the way he looked at things he was about to say that mattered. He said, "Your grandfather started putting money away in 1962. Not inside the business, separately, quietly. Harold grew up during the Depression, and he did not entirely trust either banks or business partners, but he trusted structures that were written down correctly and maintained with care." He paused. "When he passed, he left me instructions. Not in the will, which went through probate and was a matter of public record. In a separate letter delivered through his personal attorney, with specific directions about what I was to do next and who was ultimately to receive what he had started." My father's gray-green eyes were steady and direct the way they always were when something important was being said. He asked me to add to what he had started. To protect the structure, to keep it outside the standard estate record, and when the time was right, to transfer it to whoever in the next generation showed the clearest and most genuine understanding of what patient, quiet building over time actually produces. He looked at me. "I have been contributing to it for 30 years, he said. "Your grandfather's original sum, my additions over 3 decades, and the growth on both of those, managed by a private corporate trustee I selected in 2012. The trust has a single named beneficiary." He slid the folder across the desk toward me. "That beneficiary is you." I looked at the folder. I did not reach for it immediately. I was running the arithmetic of what this meant in the back of my mind, and the arithmetic was producing numbers I had not been prepared for. I said, "Why me? Why not both of us?" He said, "Because Diane has never had to build anything. Because everything she has arrived either through your mother's preference or through Marcus, and she has no framework for what it costs to construct something from the ground up. She would not know what to do with what is in that folder in any way that honored how it was built or why it exists." He paused and looked at me steadily. "And because I have been watching you for 28 years. I watched you study when no one was paying attention to what you were studying. I watched you work when other people your age were deciding which restaurants to go to. I watched you build a firm from absolutely nothing with your own hands, and I watched it become something real and lasting. Every time I looked at Ashford Financial Partners, I saw my father in the shape of what you were doing. I saw the part of this family that understands what patience actually produces in the end." He tapped the folder once. "Do not open this here. Do not mention it to your mother or to Diane or to anyone else in the family. Get an attorney you trust completely, have every element verified independently, and then simply wait. Whenever the estate situation becomes relevant in the years ahead, everything in that folder will already be legally and correctly in place. You will not need to fight for anything, because it will already be yours." I took the folder home in my bag. I set it on my kitchen table and did not open it for 3 days. I made dinner on Friday night, worked through the weekend, as I always did, and on Monday morning I called Patricia Helm, an estate and trust attorney I had worked alongside on behalf of several high-net-worth clients over the previous 4 years, and whose judgment I trusted as completely as I trusted anyone's professional judgment. I drove to her office and set the folder on her desk and said, "I need you to tell me what this is, and whether it is real, and what it means." Her team spent 2 weeks conducting the verification. The trust was called the Ashford Legacy Preservation Trust. It had been established by Harold Ashford in 1962 and administered since 2012 by a private corporate trustee called Meridian Fiduciary Services, headquartered in Scottsdale. The assets held in trust included a combination of long-hold equity investment accounts, 2 commercial real estate parcels in the East Valley that had appreciated substantially over decades of patient ownership, and a ladder of government bonds accumulated in stages across 60 years of regular contribution. The trust structure was legally sound under Arizona trust law. The beneficiary designation was irrevocable under the terms of the trust instrument. The documentation trail was complete and properly maintained. Patricia called me into her conference room on a Wednesday morning in late October of 2015. She set a single page on the desk between us. She said, "Everything checks out. It is valid, it is clean, and it is entirely yours." She turned the page around so I could read the number at the bottom line. The current valuation as of that quarter was $28,400,000. I read that number 4 times. I set the page back on her desk. I said, "What do the next steps look like?" I did not call anyone. I did not go home and open a bottle of wine and tell a friend. I drove home, made dinner in my kitchen, and sat at my table for a long time in the quiet thinking about Harold Ashford, whom I had known only as a large, slow-moving old man with big, careful hands and a deliberate way of occupying space, who had apparently understood in 1962 that the most important investment a person can make is one that no one knows about yet. Over the next 9 years, I worked consistently and carefully with Patricia Helm and with Richard Solano, the lead trust officer at Meridian Fiduciary Services, to ensure the trust remained properly structured, properly documented, and protected against any future legal challenge. We engaged a second independent estate attorney for verification after my father's death in 2020, which changed certain administrative circumstances. We filed every required tax disclosure. We updated the documentation to reflect the changed trustee circumstances. We did everything through proper legal channels and in the correct order because the single greatest risk to what my grandfather had built across 60 years was a procedural error, and I was not going to let a procedural error undo what patience had produced. I told no one in the family, not my mother during the 11 weeks I spent in her house, not Diane in any of the conversations we had during my mother's illness, not a cousin, not a family friend, not anyone who shared a surname with me. By January of 2025, with the accumulated growth of 9 additional years compounded and verified by Meridian Fiduciary Services, the trust valuation had reached $45,214,000. My mother, Vivian Ashford, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in July of 2024. She was 72 years old, and the disease had progressed through the early stages without producing the kind of symptoms that prompt early investigation, which is characteristic of pancreatic cancer, and by the time the imaging confirmed the diagnosis, the window was already significantly narrowed. She was given, in Dr. Lynette Chow's careful and compassionate language, months rather than years. I drove her to every appointment at Banner MD Anderson. I organized her complete medical file and coordinated with Dr. Chow's team and the palliative care nurse assigned to my mother's case. I ensured that her medications were correct, and that her insurance claims were processed on time, and that her legal documents, including her will and her healthcare directive, were properly in order. I spent 11 of the last 14 weeks of her life in Phoenix, sleeping in my childhood bedroom under the same blue and white quilt that had been on that bed since I was 12, making breakfast on the mornings when she still had appetite, sitting with her on the back porch in the October light when the air was warm enough to make sitting outside feel like a genuine gift rather than an effort. Diane came for 4 weekends across those 14 weeks. She brought a casserole on the second visit. She called on Tuesdays and Saturdays from 11 to 11:30, and the rigid regularity of those calls was its own kind of statement about what she understood her responsibility to be. There was a specific conversation in late September that I returned to more often than I would like to. My mother was sitting in the recliner in the living room, smaller than I had ever seen her, The woman who had always occupied every room with such deliberate, curated intention, made somehow porous and uncertain by illness. I was sitting across from her on the couch. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment, the way she almost never did, with real attention rather than the cataloging glance she usually turned in my direction, and she said, "You have always been so capable, Caroline, so completely self-sufficient." She said it with something I spent months afterward trying to name. Not admiration precisely, but something adjacent to it. Something that had decided, early and finally, that capability in a daughter meant that daughter required nothing further from those who loved her. I looked back at her. I said, "I learned it somewhere, Mom." She did not answer that. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the bougainvillea was still going in the October heat, brilliant magenta against the afternoon sky, the way bougainvillea goes long after everything else in the desert has decided to stop. I sat with her until she fell asleep in the recliner with the afternoon light across her lap, and then I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a while looking at the yard. She passed on the 6th of November, on a Tuesday morning, at home, in the way she would have chosen, with both of her daughters present. I held her left hand. Diane held her right. The hospice nurse was in the doorway. The light came through the east-facing windows the way it always had through those windows in the mornings, and my mother's breathing slowed over the course of that hour, and then stopped, the way a long sentence reaches its period. I am grateful we were both there. I am grateful for that completely. The reading of the will was set for the 14th of March, 4 months later, per the instructions in the document itself. Gerald Okafor's office in Scottsdale, a law office on a tree-lined street near Gainey Ranch, the kind of firm with good parking and understated signage and leather chairs in the waiting room, and the particular quiet of places where serious things are decided. I arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. Diane and Marcus arrived together at 2:40 in a black Range Rover that Marcus drove with the deliberate ease of someone who wants you to notice he is not trying to impress you. Diane's attorney, Kevin Bright, whom she had retained preemptively, and whose presence at the reading told me everything I needed to know about her confidence in the outcome, arrived at the same moment and held the door open for her in the practiced way of someone being paid to perform attentiveness. I had told Patricia Helm to be available by phone. I had Richard Solano on standby. My folder was in my bag, and I did not remove it in the waiting area. Okafor read the will with methodical care. He was a quiet man, precise in speech, the kind of attorney who reads every line aloud, as though someone in the room might dispute the language later. The document was 8 pages. The first 6 covered the personal property, the jewelry, the Arcadia house and its contents, the vehicles, the personal investment accounts, and the charitable bequest my mother had arranged. Diane received the house and all its contents, valued at approximately $1,100,000. Diane received the jewelry, including a double strand of pearls that had belonged to my maternal grandmother and which my mother had always worn to the most significant occasions. Diane received the primary investment accounts, which totaled approximately $340,000 net of estate costs and applicable taxes. When Okafor reached the final bequest, he set the preceding pages in a neat stack to one side and looked briefly at me before he read. He had the expression of a man who is performing a professional duty he would prefer to be performing somewhere else. He said, "To my daughter Carolyn Marie Ashford, I bequeath the sum of $1, in recognition of her financial independence and her demonstrated capacity for self-sufficiency." He paused. The room was perfectly quiet. He continued reading. "It is my belief and sincere intention that Caroline requires no assistance from this estate, and that she has already built for herself what this estate might otherwise have provided." Silence, and then Diane made that sound, the controlled exhale through the nose. Her shoulders softened. She looked at the table and then at me, and she said, "Well, I guess Mom knew what she was doing." Marcus put his hand briefly on her arm. Kevin Bright was writing in his legal pad with the focus of someone calculating billable hours on a case he had already been told he would win. Okafor looked at me carefully. He said, "Ms. Ashford, do you have any questions regarding the document as read?" I said, "Not about that document." Kevin Bright looked up from his pad. Diane's head turned. I opened my bag. I removed the first folder and set it in front of Gerald Okafor, flat on the table, without hurry. I removed the second folder and set it in front of Kevin Bright. I removed a business card and set it on the table in front of Marcus, who had not anticipated having anything placed in front of him this afternoon. I said, "My attorney is Patricia Helm of Helm Estate Law in Phoenix. Her direct number is on the card. The document in front of you, Mr. Okafor, is a formal notification of the existence of the Ashford Legacy Preservation Trust, established by Harold Ashford in 1962 and currently administered by Meridian Fiduciary Services of Scottsdale. I am the sole named and irrevocable beneficiary of that trust. The document in front of you, Mr. Bright, is the executed trust agreement and the most recent certified asset valuation statement. Provided in the interest of complete transparency and in order to prevent any future legal disputes regarding the standing and status of the trust." 4 seconds of absolute silence passed. Marcus said, "What?" Diane was looking at the folder in front of Kevin Bright. She had not touched it. She was staring at it with the stillness of someone whose internal calculations have just encountered a number that does not resolve. She said, "What is this?" I said, "It is a trust established by your grandfather Harold Ashford in 1962 and added to by your father Robert for 30 consecutive years. It was formally placed under irrevocable sole beneficiary designation in 2012 through Meridian Fiduciary Services. That designation names me as the sole and irrevocable beneficiary of the trust and all its assets." Kevin Bright opened his folder. He was reading. He turned to the second page where the valuation certificate sat. He read for approximately 30 seconds. Then he leaned toward Diane and said, in a voice that was not as quiet as he believed it to be, "Diane, this is a valid instrument. This is real." Marcus gripped the back of Diane's chair with both hands. Diane looked across the table at me. Her face was doing something I had never witnessed it do in 43 years of shared life. The composure she had carried into that room, the practiced, premeditated satisfaction of a woman who had already rehearsed receiving good news in front of an audience, was dissolving in real time. She was trying to reassemble it, and she was not finding the pieces. She said, in a different voice than any voice I had heard from her before, "What is the valuation?" I said, $45,214,000, as of the most recent quarterly statement. The number landed in the room the way significant numbers land. Silently, completely, with a weight that changes the temperature of the air around it. Kevin Bright turned to the valuation certificate. He set his pen down. Diane said, "That money should be divided between us. That is family money, and it should be shared." I said, "It has a sole and irrevocable beneficiary designation, legally executed in 2012, verified by 2 independent estate attorneys, and audited quarterly by Meridian Fiduciary Services. The designation cannot be challenged retroactively under Arizona trust law. Patricia Helm's number is on the card in front of Marcus." Okafor looked at his associate. His associate looked at his notepad. Neither of them spoke. Diane stood up. For a moment, I believed she was about to say something that would define the nature of our relationship for whatever years remained of it. Instead, she picked up Kevin Bright's folder with both hands and held it the way someone holds something they are trying to decide whether to believe. And she said, in a voice entirely stripped of performance and social confidence, and the easy authority she had spent her whole life wielding without examining its source, "I didn't know." I said, "I know. Dad never told me." "No, he didn't. He chose you." I said, "He made his decision a very long time ago." She sat back down. She set the folder on the table and looked at Marcus, who had gone the specific pale of men whose financial comfort depends on their wives, and who have just watched that mathematics change without warning. She looked at Kevin Bright, who was writing rapidly. She looked at the wall behind my head, and then she looked at me, and for the first time in my living memory, my sister Diane Ashford looked at me the way I had always looked at everything, with the expression of someone encountering a thing she had not sufficiently accounted for and now needed to understand from the beginning. I stood. I gathered my bag. I said, "Patricia's number is on the card." I nodded to Okafor. "Thank you for your time today." I walked to the door and opened it and stepped into the corridor. I rode the elevator to the lobby without examining my reflection in the polished doors. I walked out of the building into the March afternoon in Scottsdale, into the warm desert light that falls in that particular way in March, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my bag at my side, and I breathed slowly and steadily. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be very exact about this, because I understand what people expect a narrator to feel at the moment that a story reaches its apex, and those expectations are understandable. but they were not what was true for me. What I felt was something closer to completion. The particular feeling of a sentence that has been working toward its period for a very long time and has finally, precisely found it. Now I want to stop and speak directly to you. If you have stayed with me through every part of this story, I want to say something to you specifically. Do you know someone in your life who has been the capable one, the reliable one, the woman that everyone calls in a crisis and thanks briefly when it is over? Someone whose strength has been mistaken, year after year, for not requiring anything? If that person is you, or if you have someone like that in your life, and you recognize what she carries, leave me a comment right now. Tell me about it. Tell me what it looks like in your family. And if this channel has become something you look forward to, something that gives you the specific kind of companionship that comes from hearing a story told honestly, please subscribe. We put out a new episode every single day, and every one of them is made for women who know what it costs to carry something quietly while the room looks the other way. You belong here. Now let's finish. The weeks after the reading were quieter than the preceding years had been. There was no family tribunal, no group confrontation, no dramatic phone call from any relative with an opinion. What happened was slower and more real than any of that. Diane called me 3 days after the reading. She asked if we could meet for coffee. We met on a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock at a cafe in Biltmore, neutral ground, a table by the window where the March light came in flat and honest. She looked tired in the careful way of a person who has not been sleeping well but is maintaining the surface appearance of having slept adequately. She ordered tea and did not drink it. She said that she had not known about the trust, that our father had never mentioned it to her, that she wished she had seen things between us more clearly over the years. She said she believed she had been, in her own way, complicit in the pattern of how the family saw me, by never questioning it, or naming it, or pushing back against it. I told her I believed that she had not known about the trust. I did not confirm or deny the rest of it. She said she hoped we could find a way forward. I said, "What does that mean to you?" She thought about it for a real moment before answering. She said, "I would like us to still be sisters." I said, "We are sisters. That is not in question. But things are different now." I said, "Things have always been different, Diane. We just define differently." She did not know what to do with that. She held her cup without drinking. She said, "I'm sorry," I smirked. I said, "I know." She said, "When you sat there while they read the $1 and you didn't react at all, were you holding it in, or did you genuinely feel nothing?" I thought about that question honestly. I said, I felt something. A $1 bequest from a parent is not nothing. It is a statement about how they saw you, and statements from people who love you but see you wrong still land somewhere real inside you. But it was a considerably smaller thing than what was in my bag. She nodded slowly. She said, "I have been thinking about Dad. About what it means that he made that choice and never told me." I said, "What have you concluded?" She said, after a moment, that I spent a very long time performing for the wrong audience. I looked at her across the table. That was, I thought, probably the most honest thing Diane Ashford had ever said to me at any table in any room in our shared lifetime. I said, "That is a reasonable conclusion." We finished our coffee. We did not embrace when we said goodbye, but we did not leave in anger either. We left in something that felt like the early edge of a different and more truthful kind of relationship, one founded on what was actually the case between us rather than on what the family had decided was the case, which is considerably less comfortable but considerably more durable in the long run. I have been asked, by more than one person in the weeks since, what I intend to do with the trust. Whether I will share any of it, whether I will bring it into the firm structure or keep it in its existing form, whether giving some of it to Diane, has crossed my mind. These are questions I do not feel required to answer publicly, and I will not. What I will say is that I intend to carry it the way it was meant to be carried, patiently, purposefully, and with full awareness of what it cost the people who built it to build it this way. I have made one specific decision that I want to share here. I am establishing a scholarship fund at the University of Arizona for first-generation women studying finance and economics. The initial endowment is $250,000 drawn from the trust. It will be called the Harold Ashford Memorial Scholarship because it was Harold who began all of this in 1962, with the specific understanding that the most valuable inheritance a family can leave is not a sum of money, but the belief that what you build patiently and quietly will eventually become real. The scholarship will be awarded annually to women who demonstrate the particular quality Harold recognized: the capacity to work in a direction before the world has confirmed that the direction matters. My father would understand that. He sat across a mahogany desk from me in September of 2015 and made his choice not because I was the more lovable daughter, but because he had watched me for 28 years and recognized in the shape of what I was building the same quality his father had possessed: the willingness to be absolutely certain of something no one else has confirmed yet. The patience to wait for the moment when the room is quiet enough for accuracy to finally be heard. And my mother. I have spent more time with this part of the story than with any other part of it, and I do not have a clean answer, and I have made peace with not having one. I believe she loved me. I believe the dismissal was not malice, but a specific kind of blindness that comes from categorizing someone too early and never looking closely enough again to discover you were wrong. She left me $1 because she believed she was releasing me, acknowledging my independence, giving formal expression in legal language to the things she had always believed about me: that I was already taken care of, that I did not need what others needed. She was right about the last part. She was simply wrong about what the gesture would sound like in that room, in front of those people, when it was read aloud in formal language in the afternoon light. Or perhaps she knew exactly what it would sound like. Perhaps the dollar was its own kind of directness, finally and clearly spoken. Perhaps I needed to hear it without ambiguity, in front of witnesses, to finally stop waiting for something that was simply never going to come from that direction. I do not know. I have decided I do not need to know. I carry her memory without that particular weight, because the weight of that question would occupy space I have now given to other things. To anyone watching this right now who is the capable one in her family, the woman they call when there is a crisis and thank briefly when it passes, I want to speak directly to you. Capability is not invisibility. Self-sufficiency is not proof that you do not need anything. The strength they take for granted is the exact strength that will outlast every room they ever tried to contain you in. Build anyway. Keep working anyway. Maintain your integrity and your patience and your standards and your dignity, not because they will eventually notice, but because what you build in that quality of sustained attention becomes something no one can retroactively dispute or diminish. It becomes real in a way that performances never are. And one day, in a room full of witnesses, everything you have built will simply walk in, quietly, exactly on time, without announcement, and the room will understand. You do not need them to believe in you to make what you are building real. What you build in silence is still real. That was the moment I stopped being the daughter they forgot to celebrate and started becoming the woman who had already, quietly, long ago, given herself everything she needed. Before I go, I need to ask you something, and I mean it as a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. Have you ever sat in a room where your value was announced in the wrong direction? Where something that was designed to diminish you ended up revealing exactly what you had been quietly becoming all along? Or are you in the middle of that right now, the silent build, the patient work, the years when no one in your family knows what you are actually constructing? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and if you are somewhere in the middle of your own quiet preparation, I want you to leave this video with something to hold. The silence itself is building something. The patience itself is producing something. You are not invisible. You are in preparation. Now, to all of you who have watched this story, from wherever you are in the world, at whatever hour it is where you are sitting right now, thank you. Thank you genuinely and completely. This channel exists because we believe that every woman who has been the capable one, the overlooked one, the daughter who got the fruit basket instead of the vacation, deserves to hear her story told clearly and with dignity. Every view, every comment, every subscriber is a reminder that these stories matter and that we are honored every single day to be the ones telling them. We will be right back here tomorrow with another story built in silence and told with dignity. Take care of yourselves. Until next time.